consolidated seed and fertilizer companies that grossly inflate their product prices. Last year, Farm Action released a report and testified before Congress about these market abuses in the highly consolidated fertilizer sector. Then, as mega retailers take over rural communities, farmers are also facing a dwindling number of purchasers, which often means farmers don't receive a fair price for their goods. And workers aren't faring any better. With the heavy consolidation that we're seeing in food processing and retail, workers are suffering from reduced wages as they lose the ability to negotiate better pay and working conditions because there aren't other employers to turn to. And consumers feel the sting of this consolidation too. We've all seen how food prices skyrocketed at the grocery store over the last few years under the guise of these vague market disruptors. In the case of eggs, the drastic price hikes were often falsely attributed to avian flu outbreaks. As Farm Action called out in our letter to the FTC, the dominant egg supplier in the US never reported a single case of avian flu at any of its facilities, yet it used that excuse anyway and tripled the price of eggs. And it was just price gouging, plain and simple. So it's clear that the dominant corporations reigning over our food system have learned that there are minimal consequences for their actions, and it's time for this to change. In July 2021, President Biden issued a sweeping executive order on promoting competition in the American economy, which directed federal agencies to revive antitrust enforcement and promote competition throughout the economy. But the promises of the executive order are only words unless these agencies take action. Last June, we collaborated with the Open Markets Institute to create a report card grading government agencies' progress towards the directives in this executive order. And today we're presenting an updated report card grading the progress of the administration in order to hold these agencies accountable on behalf of farmers, workers, and the American people. Farm Action's Sarah Cardin and Open Markets Institute's Claire Kellaway will break down each section of our report card and our analysis. We'll have about 25 minutes at the end for Q&A, so we encourage you to put your questions in the chat as we go along. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah and Claire.
Thanks so much, Angela. So let's dive into it. So as we did last year, we utilized a weighted grading system, giving more impactful directives additional weight. We relied upon our own combined expertise and feedback from farmers and ranchers within our network to determine which directives would have larger impacts and weighted those measures to reflect our assessment. The report evaluates each agency individually and provides an assessment with our justification for each grade. Today, we'll walk you through these report cards and our thinking behind these grades, and then we look forward to answering your questions. And so to start us off, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Claire.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And hello again, everyone. My name is Claire Kellaway. I am the food program manager for the Open Markets Institute. I'm going to be starting by walking through our grades for the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division and the Federal Trade Commission. So when we were creating these report cards, we really wanted to recognize that both antitrust enforcement agencies have taken some steps over the past year that we think really represent a break from the status quo of what heretofore had been fairly lax antitrust enforcement. So at the Justice Department, we see that both in their public presentations and statements, they've been talking a lot about food and agriculture, and then also taking on some food and agriculture companies in their lawsuits. One type of enforcement that we really wanted to highlight was the consent decree that they reached with Cargill, Sanderson, and Wayne Farms, which both accuse these companies of conspiring with each other to fix wages for workers at their plants, but also use the Paxton Stockyards Act to challenge the way that they pay chicken farmers and accused it of being deceptive. And in that, secured some new standards for paying chicken farmers which Cargill and Sanderson, once merged, will represent about 15% of the industry. And so this is a really substantial change for all of those farmers and represents some unique lawyering on the DOJ's part. At the FTC, we similarly gave them a higher grade for vigorous antitrust enforcement because they too have brought in some new cases in the food and agriculture sector, most notably their case against Syngenta and Corteva, which revives a underused part of the Clayton Act. And so we thought represented, vigorous, more expansive enforcement, but also really critically goes after behavior, in this case, loyalty rebates that prevent distributors from carrying cheaper generic pesticides, which is really an issue across the food sector. And this case, puts companies on notice for that. Another really important thing that the FTC did over the past year is revive its unfair methods of competition rulemaking authority. First, with a statement that it issued last fall, policy statement, saying the agency is going to be using this authority, and then by proposing the first unfair methods of competition rule in decades by banning non-compete agreements. And just on its face, banning non-competes would have a huge benefit to the food sector. About 1 in 6 food service and preparation workers is affected by a non-compete, and 1 in 5 agriculture industry workers is affected by a non-compete. But more importantly, just using this authority at all hopefully opens the door for further unfair methods of competition rules in the future. And so that's why we gave them a B overall for both their policy statement and starting this authority. But, we also wanted to recognize that our highest grades, so to speak, are reserved for more transformational enforcement that is really going to restructure industries and level the playing field for all producers by setting limitations on the way that dominant companies can do business. And so for that, we didn't give any A's for more vigorous antitrust enforcement because we would like to see the DOJ bring some monopolization cases to try and break up some of these biggest harmful agricultural monopolies. We would also like to see the FTC take on concentrated buyer power in the retail sector by taking on the Robinson-Patman Act. We're especially looking at what the agencies are going to do with the Kroger and Albertsons merger. And we would also like to see the FTC issue more than one unfair methods of competition rules. Specifically, we think banning exclusive dealing would have a big effect for producers and farmers and small businesses across the food sector. And so that is how we ended with our grades for both of the antitrust enforcement agencies. With that, I'll pass it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about USDA, if you could forward the slide.
Thanks so much, Claire. So of all the agencies we evaluated, USDA received the lowest overall grade with a C. Comparatively, their general performance is frankly lackluster, and while they have been successful on some directives, they appear to lack an appreciation for the urgency and time sensitivity of other more impactful directives. Because of some significant improvements to certain directives, such as product of the USA rulemaking, their grade is a marked improvement from the D+ we gave them last year. However, it still remains disappointing due to critical delays in the directives pertaining to Packers and Stockyards Act rulemakings and the department's underwhelming progress as it relates to its procurement policies. So to get started, the executive order directs the USDA to create several reports. At our last evaluation, they had already completed their report on promoting alternative food distribution and value-added products. Since then, they've also published a report on intellectual property, seeds, and competition. Both of these reports were thorough and adequate and consequently received Bs, and we are still waiting on the final outstanding report to be delivered on retail market concentration. While on the topic of reports, we were really happy to see the USDA go beyond the specifics of the directives as outlined in the executive order with the publication of ERS's recent report, Concentration and Competition in U.S. Agribusiness. This report examined growing market concentration in 3 industries: seeds, meatpacking, and food retail. The report contains compelling data sets, but once again, the USDA falls a bit short in the analysis of said data, lacks a level of conviction in connecting concerning trends, such as price hikes and other anti-competitive behavior, with rising concentration in these industries. The executive order also included clear language directing all agencies to use their procurement to improve competition by supporting small businesses. I cannot stress enough how important it is for the USDA to support the investments it is making to foster a more competitive agricultural economy with its procurement policies. Unfortunately, USDA's progress on this front has been slow. Without immediate support, the meatpacking plants USDA has invested in are in jeopardy of failing, and inevitably the larger dominant packers will be there to purchase the remnants. USDA failed to finalize proposed changes to agriculture acquisition regulation, changes that would have increased transparency and enforcement of labor law violations for firms contracting with the USDA. USDA's recent deployment, though, of a new tool intended to assist small and disadvantaged entities identify potential procurement opportunities is promising and responsible for USDA's grade increase from a D to a C this year. But we still need to see USDA taking more aggressive action on this front through the establishment of strong procurement set-asides and other policies. The main justification for USDA's improved grade was their Product of USA label rulemaking that would effectively close voluntary origin labeling loopholes. This was a much needed and well-written rule that will help rein in rampant mislabeling practices by the big packers, giving smaller independent producers a more fair playing field and providing transparency for Americans. We were also excited to see USDA demonstrate a further initiative with FSIS's new proposal to rein in false animal welfare claims, such as antibiotic-free and free-range. In fact, within a month of this announcement, Tyson has already announced their plans to roll back their own antibiotic-free labeling. Accordingly, we were able to raise their grade this year from an F all the way to an A+. Our biggest criticism of the USDA, however, is their failure to strengthen the Packers and Stockyards Act through various rulemakings in a time-sensitive manner. The executive order included 5 different directives for the Packers and Stockyards Act. So if you could just next slide, please. So as you can see, the absence of the harm to competition rule will leave this law essentially toothless. And so we've given this rule some additional weight. So far, USDA has proposed 2 rules and 1 advance notice of a proposed rulemaking. Of all of the items outlined in the executive order, we feel that only protection from retaliatory practices has been adequately addressed thus far. USDA's second proposed rule, the Inclusive Competition and Market Integrity under Packers and Stockyards Act, takes a novel approach to addressing undue or unreasonable preferences, advantages, prejudices, or disadvantages by offering protection to a newly defined class of market vulnerable farmers. Neither of the proposed rules effectively identify and ban recurrent unfair practices, despite the fact that many of these practices have been clearly identified for the USDA in the 2010 hearings and through research and conversations since. They have yet to ban the tournament system in poultry, and in fact, the DOJ, as Claire mentioned, has arguably done more to strengthen the Packers and Stockyards Act by declaring this tournament system deceptive in their Cargill Continental Sanderson consent decree, effectively banning the tournament system in 15% of the market. More troublingly, we have yet to see a harm to competition rule, one that clarifies that you do not need to prove harm to the entire industry in order to establish a Packers and Stockyards claim. And the important thing to note is that they are running out of time to do so. Any rules issued after this summer will be vulnerable to repeal by the Congressional Review Act, And according to the spring 2023 Unified Agenda on Regulatory and Deregulatory Actions, we should not expect to see a harm to competition rule until November at the earliest. Implementing these rules is arguably the most important action USDA can take to ensure fair conduct in livestock markets. So in summary, we're concerned that USDA does not seem fully committed to the vision laid out in the historic executive order promoting competition in the American economy. On the one hand, USDA is making important strides in supporting a more broad range of producers, but they lack conviction when it comes to confronting corporate control of our food supply chain. Bottom line, we need the agency to start taking more aggressive action now before it is too late. We therefore believe a fair grade for the department's work on these issues is a C, and in order to improve its grade, USDA must issue strong packers and stockyards rules before the end of the summer and improve its procurement policies so that they can work to support a broader range of producers. So that should help conclude the presentation portion of this webinar. And with that, we would love to turn it over to questions.
And you can use the Q&A feature to submit a question. I'm seeing one question that perhaps Sarah might be able to take on, but it says, what efforts are you presumably being either the agencies or lawmakers, but what efforts are being taken to reallocate subsidies from food grown for animals instead of subsidizing farmers who grow food for human consumption, arguing that the subsidy system is reducing the price of meat and affecting the environment.
Sure. So this ties into much of our work on competition and supporting a broader range of producers as we see some of the subsidies that are prioritizing feed for animal consumption. Really, the benefits of those subsidies ending up in the pockets of meat packers. We see this because we know meat prices for consumers are rising. We know farmers' share of the retail dollar is falling. And so meanwhile, we see meat packers reporting record profits. And so some efforts we're working to do are to improve various support programs for USDA support programs for a broader range of producers, like improvements to the federal crop insurance program is a big one. USDA has, it's worth noting, they have made big strides in this, but they're with some of the more recent changes to microfarm and whole farm revenue program, but there is still more work to be done on that front. So I hope that helps answer some of your question.
I can answer another question here about how the Farm Bill is implicated in agencies' abilities to fulfill different parts of the executive order, most notably the packers and stockyards rulemaking. We have seen the House Appropriations Committee already introduce language that would block the USDA from finalizing these packers and stockyards rulemakings. And so it is really important for Congress to also not get in the way of ensuring that the agencies can fulfill these orders. And so, yes, that's something we're following. I guess we are hopeful that these riders will not pass, but we do know that unfortunately, they have passed during past efforts to try and implement these rules. I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything else to add on that.
No, I think that's great. Sorry, I'm just reading these questions as they come in. So I can answer, we have a question on false labeling practices and how that can be better enforced. We talked about the product of USA rulemaking being very impactful to the USDA's grade. And, we really firmly believe that truth in labeling is a critical tool that we need to be utilizing to create a more competitive and support a more competitive agricultural economy. We are very concerned about false labeling practices. And so the question was if these issues can be better enforced in the Farm Bill. And the answer is yes, there is opportunity in the Farm Bill. One thing, we were very highly supportive of the product of USA labeling rulemaking, but that is a voluntary label. So we are also in the Farm Bill working to advocate for mandatory country of origin labeling, MCOOL, for both beef and pork products, so that there is no opportunity for misleading labeling, so that we can make sure that American producers' products are able, for consumers interested in paying a premium or supporting that market opportunity, that would be available to them.
And I can answer this question about the feasibility of some of the new, both like rancher driven, but also generally new processing plants that we're seeing getting started. So yeah, we have seen, in addition to this executive order, the Biden administration and the USDA have been supporting the creation of new meatpacking plants, which is another way to inject competition into this sector, and something we recognize in the report card, in the last report card. But we think a lot of the other paired policies, both in the Packers and Stockyards Act, and also some of these unfair competition rulemakings that the Federal Trade Commission has the power to issue, are really going to be necessary to ensure that these plants have a fair chance at succeeding. Generally, the biggest feasibility question facing some of these new plants is how are they going to get their product to market? And we see issues with large concentrated retailers having relationships either with large distributors, or distributors and retailers having relationships with large food companies, frankly, not unlike some of the exclusionary loyalty rebates that the FTC is going after pesticide companies for. But point being, there are all these ways that large players lock up access to these markets. We know most people are getting their food at a restaurant, at a cafeteria, in a grocery store. Direct consumer to markets are growing, but still not the main place where most meat is sold. And so we really want to see more rules that level that playing field, ban things like exclusive dealing, and ensure that these plants can access markets in order to succeed. And, Farm Action has also worked about this, and Sarah, you could probably fill in on the importance of also pairing that with local procurement policies, so that there's another public market for these products as well.
Yeah, and that actually, I was just looking at Catherine Vidal's question too, so that ties into because the Farm Bill, she asked whether the Farm Bill provisions will solve some of these problems, and the Farm Bill provisions do offer opportunity to solve many of these problems. As far as procurement policy, one barrier USDA is facing is that a procurement, they are not able to issue a target for local procurement, for instance, without congressional authority. So that is one important way that the Farm Bill could address and support USDA's efforts in this. The Opportunities for Fairness in Farming Act is another really important opportunity in the Farm Bill to support a more fair and competitive agricultural and food system. This is a bill that is looking at the checkoff program. For those of you unfamiliar with the checkoff program, it is a mandatory tax commodity producers are taxed on their goods. So, for instance, for every cow that a cattle producer raises, they need to pay $1 into the checkoff program. But these numbers add up to be quite substantial, near $1 billion we're talking. And so, unfortunately, the program has been eroded and lost some much needed transparency and has ended up funneling money into the pockets of really like industry groups that are representing and prioritizing packers and other industry representatives over producers. And so this is an important opportunity to introduce reforms to the program that are much needed and to help it work better for our farmers. I don't know if you wanted to add to that too, Claire. I'm just looking through the other questions.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely covered there. So yeah, there are definitely opportunities in the Farm Bill. And, even broadly, there's been talks about, I don't know, I guess they're not necessarily on the table, but of course you could, reform the Packers and Stockyards Act through legislation as well, but like the Farm Bill is the way to do that. Yeah. So I guess we have another question here about the history of the Packers and Stockyards Act reforms, a contention that the current Secretary of Agriculture, when he was previously in this position, had the same mandate to issue some of these reforms, faced a lot of the same barriers, and due to what one would argue a lack of speed, failed to bring them across the finish line. And so what is going to be different this time around? I think the political landscape is definitely different with the pandemic and the way that has put meatpacking consolidation in the spotlight in the way it really was not at the time that these rules were proposed the first time. And I think we also see a markedly different commitment from the White House, from the president, to take on consolidation in meatpacking. And so given those forces, I guess we would hope it is a different political climate and that these rules will get done. But to the point of our report card, we're worried about the time remaining. And so that's definitely largely what we are trying to highlight here through our grades and through this update. Sarah, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think that was great. There's another question. Oh, here we go. Another question that we can take a look at. So what do you see as the impact on farmers with increased consolidation, like the Tyson merger on chicken farmers? I think both of our organizations are very concerned. That's part of the impetus behind making sure that these agencies are holding them accountable for their actions in this directive, that as we lose with increased consolidation, we are losing competition, and these farmers, particularly, our poultry farmers and a lot of our producers are losing options, and they, many poultry farmers, I mean, the majority of them only have a handful of buyers that they can work with, or integrators that they're able to even work with, which means they have no say or very little say in any of their contractual arrangements, and they end up in really predatory contracts and don't have any ability to get out of those contracts. And as we see their increased consolidation, we see them losing more options. So to answer that question, we are very concerned about that.
And I see a question here from Dennis Olson about, we see Walmart is increasing its vertical integration into the beef industry. They just opened a case-ready plant as a part of the minority stake that they own in Sustainable Beef, another new packing plant that's getting started. And I'll note that this follows a trend we've seen across the retail sector. Costco has started an entire chicken supply chain in Nebraska that wasn't there before. We see Walmart, Kroger, Albertsons, all are involved in the milk bottling industry. And so the question is, what do we think regulatory agencies should do about this vertical integration? I think this is definitely one of those areas where partially why, we didn't give A+ for increased vigorous enforcement. We think this is definitely an area that could have more scrutiny, whether it's under the antitrust laws or in the way that this affects price discrimination through, increased grocery buyer power and the Robinson-Patman Act. But certainly in the case of the cattle sector, there's a concern that these types of forward contracts, like the one that Walmart has with Sustainable Beef, and that Sustainable Beef has with all its suppliers that are now going to be, committed to Walmart because Walmart has very specific conditions that cattle in the supply chain must meet because it's like a premium product. And all of that is going to be taking cattle off of the cash market, which is already quite thin and is a really critical area for price discovery. And so, yeah, it's something that we're definitely concerned about in terms of ensuring that there is competitive, fair pricing in the cattle market. And then also something we are concerned about in terms of fair competition for other grocers who are going to be competing against vertically integrated retailers. And then also the effects that this could have for suppliers who are going to be dealing with quite a lot of monopsony power if they're, in these supply chains and relying on one dominant buyer. So lots of concerns all around, definitely something worth looking into. Just looking here for other questions. I'm seeing one about dairies. So what can be done to protect small dairy farmers from corporate consolidation? For those who aren't familiar, there have been issues with consolidation in both the kind of generic, conventional dairy market, and also the organic dairy market, where there are very few processors. And one of those top, 3 organic dairy processors dropped a lot of contracts in the Northeast recently. And so, yeah, this is something where antitrust agencies and the USDA, interestingly, have some shared jurisdiction over consolidation in the dairy industry. Last year, we saw, or maybe even 2 years ago now, Dairy Farmers of America, a large co-op, was permitted to buy Dean Foods, a dominant processor, which has really decreased market access and just shrunken the amount of options for dairy farmers. But some of these large co-ops, like Dairy Farmers of America, we would argue, and they have been sued many times by their members for using, again, exclusive dealing and different kinds of things that are pushing down prices for farmers. That's an interesting area where the USDA has some authority to crack down on co-ops that are no longer serving their members or showing to use monopolistic practices under the Capper-Volstead Act. That is really, really dusty and has not been explored, and would definitely be above and beyond something for these agencies to do. But it's, yeah, another area where dairy farmers don't have a lot of outlets, so we need new merger guidelines. This is something that I went through really quickly in my presentation, but a big part of our agency grades for DOJ and FTC were lower because they have yet to issue new merger guidelines that basically set the rules for what they consider to be an unlawful merger. And we would really like them to strengthen those and complete that. They've started the process by accepting some comments, but that's another one that's long overdue for finishing, is issuing those merger guidelines. And then dairy, there's also some issues of oversupply in the way that the dairy industry is regulated. So I would also recommend checking out separate campaign not related to open markets or farm action, but Dairy Together, and also the National Family Farm Coalition have some interesting proposals to try and stabilize dairy prices that have more to do with the Farm Bill, some to do with consolidation, but also all to do with dairy pricing generally. And with that, we are coming up on time. So thank you so much to everyone who listened in and participated and asked questions. You'll be able to find our full report card on both of our respective websites. And we're happy to take follow-up questions. You can, again, find my contact online. But otherwise, thank you so much for listening in, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.